On the peaceful night of September 11th, 2011, only 10 years after the 9/11 attacks, 25-year-old Brendan Mess invited his two friends, 31-year-old Eric Wiseman and 37-year-old Raphael Tekin, to watch a football game. What no one could have expected that night was that they were brutally murdered in Brendan's second-story apartment in Waltham, Massachusetts. There was no sign of forced entry, making it seem like the men knew their attacker.
The morning after the murders, Brendan Mess's girlfriend found the men's bodies covered in a total of $5,000 cash and marijuana, which was very strange to investigators. An autopsy report showed the victims' throats had been slit almost to the point of decapitation. The victims were known to be involved in the selling of marijuana throughout the community. This led to the belief that the crime was drug-related, not personal.
The case was only put in the news for a little over a week before it seemed to be completely forgotten by the public. Investigators seemed to entirely blame it on the victims' involvement in marijuana and didn't seem to be doing much with it. A year after the murders, it was reported there was a trial team assigned to the case, and they were asking around for information on the topic, but nothing was found.
The next time there was a break in the case was in the spring on April 15, 2013, the Boston Marathon bombing. Spectators cheered on the runners as they went through the finish line, and all of a sudden a bomb went off. 3 people died and 176 others were injured. Hundreds of crime scene investigators were sent to the scene to collect every possible piece of evidence from the explosion. The prime suspects were 2 brothers found on April 18, 2013. 26-year-old Tamerlan Tsarnaev and 19-year-old Johar Tsarnaev. When their identities were posted online, people who knew the victims of the Waltham murders also began to recognize the 2 bombing suspects.
That night, shortly after the suspects were announced, the police located the brothers through a kidnapped college student. The student claimed they had carjacked his car and robbed him of $800. He was able to ask for help at a gas station when he got the chance.
When the police reached the boys, they tried to run, and the police chased them down. A shootout began between the police, and the brothers used homemade grenades against them. While Johar was trying to escape, Tamerlan was murdered by accidentally being ran over. Johar was able to flee from the firefight.
The next day, the entire city was shut down in order to locate Johar. The city had never been so empty. Every store was closed and people were not allowed outside of their homes. The police were knocking on every door trying to find him. They got a call from a woman that reported she potentially spotted the suspect. When police arrived at the lot, they found Johar hiding in a boat. He had sustained several injuries from the firefight, including multiple gunshot wounds. He was taken into custody and taken to a hospital. Here he was treated for his injuries. Johar was charged with use of a weapon of mass destruction, resulting in death, along with 29 additional terrorism-related charges. In a federal trial against Johar, over 100 witnesses were called to the stand, including 14 victims of the bombing.
2 brothers were revealed to be self-radicalized, meaning they were not connected to any other groups. They had developed their own ideology for various other terrorist groups, but weren't connected to a single one. This is what led their attacks at the marathon.
It was later revealed that Brendan Mess was friends with Tamerlan, in fact, very close friends. They trained together at the same mixed martial arts gym together. They were even roommates at one point. Tamerlan was described as very quiet and reserved, and at parties would sit at the end of the couch. He would refuse any drugs or alcohol offered to him.
The 2 brothers did have cell phone records placing them in the area that night, but no other evidence was found linking them to the murders. They took DNA from the 2 brothers, and they did not find anything. There was no proof connecting to the murders that night, besides the cell phone records and Tamerlan's strange behavior that was reported after. He hadn't gone to Brendan Mess's funeral and quickly stopped going to the gym they both trained at after his murder.
While the police were looking for more leads, they found a connection between a man named Ibrahim Tashadev and Tamerlan. He was living in Orlando, Florida, with his girlfriend. The FBI showed up at his house for questioning, but at some point through the interview, the FBI investigators shot him.
People have claimed many different stories about this, ranging from flipping a table on the FBI as well as having a lead pipe or pulling out a knife on them. The reason for being shot is ultimately unknown. Throughout the solving of the case, families reported that it didn't seem like police or investigators cared much for solving the case or cared much for the people involved.
Susan Zuckland, producer of the documentary The Murders Before the Marathon, flew out to interview Ibrahim's girlfriend, Tatiana. In the interview, Tatiana claimed that there was no way Ibrahim had committed the murders. Susan also visited Rennie, Ibrahim's wife at the time. She also claimed that Ibrahim could not have murdered the men because he was staying in Atlanta with her at the time. Rennie also stated that she had many bank statements proving this, but could not provide them to Susan.
Throughout this case, the police gave out very little information. It seemed like they were keeping it in the dark. Any reporter or family member that would ask got very little and or vague information about the case. Even when the case was in the spotlight, the police were very reluctant to release any information.
Sadly, with no further evidence linking the brothers to the murders, the case is still unsolved to this day. No fingerprinting was done to the suspects to try and link them to the crime. Since there was very little investigation done in the beginning, there was very little evidence to go on, leaving the families and friends of the three men still looking for answers to this day.
Based on the research that was done by investigators, we believe that the Waltham murders were committed by Tamerlan Sardiv. His odd behavior after the murder was suspicious. His good connection to the men leads us to believe that he was welcomed into Brendan's house on the night of the murder. Tamerlan had also had a record of crimes due to the bombing. We believe that he may have had people working with him during the murders, whether it was the other suspects or people that were never brought into the case. We believe that this case could have been solved a lot better by every party involved. People did not seem to care much for the case at all, whether or not it was investigators or families and friends. There were issues with the lack of forensics evidence being looked for and collected in the beginning, or curiosity on why there was not much found. There also should have been more people talked to and interviewed to connect to the suspects and the victims. There was a lack of information provided or investigated about Raphael and Eric, and the public should have known more about the case's existence as a whole. If they did, the case would have had a higher chance of being solved.